pose, let me see you take off. I pray you never take your cape off. Even though more time we don't fly straight. But trust me, bro, I promise we gon' die great. Our heavy, but we ain't lightweights. Our parents were legends, they had to migrate. So that's the reason not to sit around and chat.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Black Tech Unplugged. I am joined by another guest from over the pond, Anne-Marie. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. This side of the pond is doing all right.
Yes, I think everyone's doing the best they can. At least it's not 2020 again.
I mean, I read a tweet over the weekend, though, that was very incredibly dystopian. It was like, yeah, these are the best days. You know, like soon it's going to be, you know, store up however many months of food and stuff. I was like, oh my goodness. It's one of those things, like, if only you knew, right, that those were the heydays, like, would you have lived it slightly differently? So yeah, we're all right.
Yes, and Anne-Marie, for my listeners who are not aware of who you are and what the amazing things that you've done in your career, do a brief introduction of yourself.
Oh, brief introduction, very brief. I'm Anne-Marie Imafidon. I love maths and tech and helping other people. I am CEO and co-founder of a nonprofit called Stemettes that works with girls and non-binary young people to encourage them into STEM and STEAM, which I know on that side of the pond I almost don't need to explain, but STEM is science, technology, engineering and maths, and STEAM is science, technology, engineering, arts and maths. Alongside that, I am host of the Women Tech Charge podcast. As you know, I've just written a book called She's in Control, and I'm also a trustee at something called the Institute for the Future of Work. So lots of hats, basically. Yeah.
Yes, lots of hats. And we're going to touch on, I think, a majority of those in today's conversation. So excited to dive in deeper. And in fact, I want to start with you getting into tech. So for my listeners who don't know, you have been a phenom in the tech industry. You even started off at a young age. So let's just start off. I'll let you tell your story and stop talking. How did you get into tech?
This is a pop-in. This is the abridged version. So I grew up in East London. I have always wanted to know how things work. And I think there's lots of folks actually who go into technology for the same reason, where it's like, you know, how does the dishwasher work, right? It's not like they're, you know, scrubbing the dishes like I would, or even the washing machine, right? The way it works is not how I would clean them if I was going to do it by hand. And so there are lots of things around me at home that I was like, oh my goodness, how does that work? Okay, and how does that work? And I think when you ask questions in the right environment, you get answers that might inspire you in certain ways, but also allow you to understand the world around you in a particular way. So for me, that was where my journey began into maybe tech, where I have a really vivid memory, and I talk about this in the book, actually, of me taking apart our VCR player at home. And I have no idea. I mean, Deena, you don't look like maybe you remember VCR players. I don't know how many of the listeners remember VCR players. But, you know, I was like, this black rectangular object goes into a bigger black rectangular object, and Timon and Pumbaa show up on a third black rectangular. And that was like a cuboid object, right? At that point, TVs were cubes. And so, yeah, kind of one thing led to another. And so I ended up having this wunderkind, child prodigy type experience where I had accelerated learning, which I think in the US is actually a lot more common than it is here in the UK. But it meant that I ended up doing what we call GCSEs, which you'd normally do at 16. I did 2 at 10, and then A-levels that you'd normally do at 18. I did then at 11, because you do GCSEs and then you do A-levels at the end of your kind of like secondary schooling here in the UK, so kind of end of high school. And so ended up going up to Oxford for university to do maths and computer science, which was the kind of the logical conclusion, right, of logically, how does that work? How do they connect together? You know, how do systems work? And then ended up finishing from Oxford with my master's aged 20.
So question for you, if you were kind of, well, I guess we'll just call it the child prodigy, right? So you're a child prodigy, but what was that experience like? Because I'm sure there weren't a lot of people that looked like you know, in your surroundings, but 2, it's also a little bit intimidating. You're a kid.
I mean, what, for me?
Yes.
Not really. Not as much. I mean, for me, I find it really funny because I've never not done my childhood like that, right? So like, it's hard for me to compare and contrast because also, you know, I'm not perceptive at the best of times, let alone, you know, like okay, so that person did that at that point and here's what that must have meant for them day to day. But I think for me, intimidating. It was more just, this was my pace. This is what I was used to. This is what I liked. And I'd rather be doing this than, I don't know, anything else. So I really enjoyed it. I think I was also really fortunate in that I wasn't made to feel like other in a lot of the environments that I was going into. And I think this is something, you know, when we think about prejudice, when we think about racism, when we think about, you know, privileges and not having privileges in particular spaces, which, you know, when we talk about people's journeys and stories, that's what we're trying to unpick. I think for me, it was really interesting where I often didn't notice I was the only one, and often was really fortunate that I wasn't made to feel like the only one. And so me being young, Black and female in those really technical, really mathematical, really elitist spaces wasn't a big deal. It wasn't something that hampered my experience to such an extent that now that's the only thing that I remember looking back. I think it's an interesting one, though, that even if I was made to feel like other, often it was for different reasons. So I think, you know, when people listen and they think about Oxford, right, there's certain things you imagine at Oxford University, right? It's like Harry Potter, right, is what I think people are imagining. And so you can imagine me being in that space. And yes, I'm Black and young and female and from East London, which, you know, carries its own things that some people from this side of the pond will understand. But you know, the time I most felt like the odd one out was bells, right? So bell ringing, church bells. I'm sure you have this on that side of the pond. Yes. You have churches and people ring bells, and you know, across the UK there's lots of churches. That's how you know it's a city if it has a cathedral, right? Yes. And my professor that looked after us was like the senior tutor in charge of the bell ringing society at Oxford.
Okay.
And someone in the year ahead of me on the Maths and Computer Science course was a member of the Bell Ringing Society at the University of Oxford. And then someone else in my year was also a member of the Bell Ringing Society at the University of Oxford. And so, I don't know, they have these like terminology, they have this jargon, you know, they have like bell ringers jokes. And that would be the times when I'd be like, one of these is not like the other. And it's not for the reason that you think. It's because I've never rung a... I mean, till this day, I've told this story so many times, I've never rung a bell in my life. I've heard bells being rung. But it was like, there's like weird, quirky things, I guess, that you have rather than it being, you know, that you're being treated this way because you're a woman or because you're the only Black person or because you're much younger than everyone else. But I think that's something you have and take into life anyway, right? Like there are lots of environments you're in where there'll be lots of people that are much older than you. I have this for a lot of the boards that I sit on, a lot of the events that I'm part of. I'm a lot younger than most people. And so I guess I just got a head start maybe on that from my prodigy's childhood.
Okay, so yes, you probably got a head start, especially for the experiences that you are in now. But want to go back and touch on, okay, so you go to Oxford at such a young age. What was so you go to Oxford, you graduate. What was your experience after graduation?
I had a really positive experience in my first job, my first role. So I had done internships, had done, you know, spring week, shadowing, all kinds of those things while I was at university. And I'd done one actually just before I went up to university. That was part of a scheme, again, that they were running for inner city kids. I ended up working in the technology department at an investment bank. And up until that point, obviously, I didn't know what investment banks were. I didn't even realize really that technology was like a full-time job. I could genuinely just, you know, sit on the computer all day and play with these databases and these spreadsheets. And I was paid from that internship as well. And again, that was the first time my bank account had gone to 4 figures because of what they paid me, you know, over those 5 weeks. I was like, oh my goodness. And so I was like, okay, like what more? Like what else can I try before I buy almost? And so I graduated with offers for me to then, you know, join a grad scheme again at a bank, but in the technology department. I think I had 3 offers by the time I left. And so was excited to come in. I actually went back to that company that I'd interned at age 16. And so that was great because it was almost like coming home, right? And so that definitely softened the blow of coming into industry, of, you know, being in that grad scheme as well. So you've got a cohort. You know, there was one company I interned at that there were 8 Black women on that internship program in the technology department at that bank. And so for me, coming in was great. You know, it was amazing. I was being paid loads to sit on the computers all day. I was being listened to. I was being promoted. And I actually had a really, really positive experience in that grad scheme, and then rolling off of that grad scheme in that technology company. in a way that, again, I know lots of people don't have that necessarily, right? But I think that blow again was softened because I'd done the internships, because I'd had the work experience, because I'd been on those schemes. And, you know, it worked, right? That, you know, the aim was to soften the blow and widen the horizons and create that network. And I had that network. You know, I'd had wider horizons. I understood what I was coming into. And so, again, I really, really enjoyed actually coming into the technology industry, right? It was fantastic. You know, I was a real adult now on the tube with everyone else, going to my own desk, right? With my own extension. I remember getting my first business card printed and my dad loved it. Everyone, you know, everyone got that. It was like, this is Anne-Marie's direct line with the logo of the company and her full name and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed, I mean, I still enjoy my career now, but I really, really enjoyed, you know, going into that technology department and working on real problems, right? Real databases on the cloud and all these different things that I spent so long studying.
Yes. And I want to elaborate on your internship experience, because in the US, we use internships kind of to understand, and I'm sure this is the same in the UK. You use internships to understand what role you actually want to do, because there's so many roles in tech. And everyone always talks about being a software developer, but there's so many things that you can do. So were you doing the same internships every time, or were you doing a variety of roles? It
was differing. And I think you're right. Like, you have, and that's why I called it kind of try before you buy. Like, there were so many things that I could have done. And I was really clear that I didn't want to be a full-time software dev. I was super clear on that. Like, as much as I love coding, I knew that, you know, doing that all day, every day was not me. I wanted to be able to talk to people. I wanted to be able to translate problems into solutions. I wanted to, you know, to have like a slightly different kind of side of the role. So yeah, there were lots of things that I got to intern and do, but then also there were lots of things I got to see while I was on those internships. So I'd make it a point that, you know, I'd set up coffees with other people's managers, or I'd get to talk to other teams. And I think there's also that systems thinking of like, okay, how do all these different bits, like I've heard all these team names, all these acronyms, all these, you know, departments, like how do they fit together? Why do they fit like that? Why is that in that department, not in that department? So I spent all that time doing that. And whether it was, you know, me, I got to do some time on this trading floor, I got to meet the sales, because I'd done maths and computer science. So it wasn't just the tech side, it was also the finance side and derivatives and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I made sure that I went round and I was checking not just for role, but I was also checking for culture. And I was checking for, you know, in this firm, are they going to recognize that people have a life outside of work? Or are they going to all really excitedly tell us that they've been working at this company for 15 years and they haven't taken a single day of holiday, which did also happen at other places. And so I was looking at for all of those things, knowing that eventually I knew I was wanting to do my own thing. I didn't know what at that point, but it was almost like auditioning, right? It's like, okay, on this internship, here's how they do that. Here's what the senior leaders look like. Here's what they do. Here's what their days look like. You know, here's what they are like, you know, in the days that, you know, when you do meet and greets as interns, you know, you get to ask questions, all that kind of stuff. And so I was, you know, doing my research really alongside all those internships.
Yeah. And I appreciate that you mentioned this, because a lot of times people go into these internships and have these amazing opportunities, like you mentioned, to ask executives questions, or, you know, you're able to network, and we don't utilize them. We literally just go to the internship. Like you said, we make a little money, more than we've ever made. And then we go back to school. So I think it's great to call out like, hey, use these opportunities to build those relationships, and, you know, use as much time and, you know, whatever resources that you can use while on the internships, because that is an important part of tech, relationship building, but also the part that you mentioned of they're also auditioning for you.
Exactly.
Like you don't want to work in the department that only takes one day of holiday in like a year. So they're also auditioning for you. So ask all the questions.
Exactly 100%. Ask the questions, use all the discounts that you get, because often that happens as well. You know, you flash your ID card and, you know, you're allowed into this museum or whatever it might be, or you get this discount shopping at that place. So use it all. But I think, yeah, you're right, like it's such a short window, and so glean all the information that you can from all the people that you get in touch with. And, you know, like they know that they're also trying to roll out the red carpet for you, so, you know, make the most of it. Definitely.
Yes. And so how long were you in the corporate environment?
Ooh, about 5 years, 5-6 years. Yeah.
And in your 5-6 year journey, what is the biggest lesson that you've learned while navigating that space, especially as a Black woman?
Oh, it's a new it's the same lesson I continually learn. And again, you know, as a Black woman versus there wasn't a time I did it as a white woman or not as a woman. So I think for me, I love questions like that, and I understand why, but I think the main thing is that people are messy.
Ooh.
And it's something that one of my bosses said to me, and it's true. I mean, it's something in the corporate world, I think almost even more so than other places.
Mm-hmm.
People have a lot of things going on, and the corporate world, you're taught to hide it, right? You're taught to like assimilate to a particular norm. You're taught to, you know, everyone just has to be like that cog in the wheel. And actually, we're human beings, and as much as people want to be that cog in the wheel, sometimes things will happen and people are messy, and the way that one person responds to that situation outside will be completely different to the way another person responds to exactly the same situation outside. So a big thing I learned is like, there's still people, even though we're cogs in a wheel, even though, you know, they're an exec, they're still a person, right? They still have thoughts and feelings, and, you know, they're not gods, because that was it. Some of the interns I had to be like, you know, you can just ask him the question, you know, like he's gonna respond the same way any human would be. Yeah, he's got a lot of agency and power in this situation, but that doesn't mean that you can't ask a question. And so I think, yeah, the biggest thing I learned is that people are messy, and it was something that I saw time and time again. And you say, as a Black woman, some of it now I'm able to reflect back on and be like, wow, okay, in that meeting, in that offsite, you know, when I went into the deep delves of this database that we work on all the time, and I came up with a really elegant solution that, you know, a particular person in the room didn't want to believe was elegant or worked, right? Until half an hour later, when someone else is, you know, looking through the documentation, is like, yeah, this flag that Anne-Marie said was there is actually in there. Yeah, we could use that. We don't need to go and relabel all the content, you know, systematically or on a quarterly basis and batch update all these content and these tags. You know, you have experiences like that where it's like, yeah, actually, if someone else had come up with that solution, he wouldn't have thought like that he was on a hidden camera show. And yet, because it came out of my mouth, you know, it's either the young, it's the Black, it's the female, or it's a combination of all of the above.
Right.
That meant that, you know, there was an allergic reaction to, oh my goodness, as if she, you know, what she said. And you won't know in the moment, but sometimes it'll be afterwards. And I think even more so, knowing in the moment isn't really going to change anything, because I can't change that I'm Black. I'm not going to change that I'm female. I can't change my age. And so actually, it's just about understanding that, hey, like, these are things I can't change, and it's more on that person. If my database elegant solution is one that is a tough pill to swallow, there's nothing I can do about that other than ensure that I'm in the right teams and I'm in the right spaces where I'm celebrated and I'm heard, rather than simply being tolerated. And I think that's the thing. And again, people are messy. Like, I'm not blaming him. There are reasons why, as part of his upbringing, as part of his life perspective, he doesn't see this as a face that's to be trusted or believed on really technical decisions. But again, that's a him thing, that's not a me thing. And so that's one of the things I still have to this day. You know, I still get to work with lots of different people, and, you know, and take up space in lots of different rooms. And sometimes it is like, you know, are we going to take it from her? And it's like, well, I mean, it's your time you're wasting, you know. And whatever you're dealing with at home, I can't take that personally. It's because you're dealing with that. And so actually, I'm just going to, you know, focus my energy on the spaces that I am heard and I am valued, right? And where I am celebrated. So yeah, it's one thing I learned in the corporate space.
Couple highlights that I have to go back and touch on. One, do not take it personally. I think a lot of times we think that it's something that we did in the workplace, because, you know, it's just something, it's a natural reaction to think it's something you did, as opposed to, no, this is actually based on their behavior. And let me, you know, send your energy back to you, because this is something you have to deal with.
Exactly.
But I also agree with what you mentioned in regards to the environment you're in. Go where you're celebrated, go where you're appreciated. There's too many spaces out here to be stuck in a toxic, you know, suffocating environment. But there are a ton of great places where you'll be a good fit. And that also goes back to what you mentioned in regards to, we're interviewing these companies just like they're interviewing us. So make sure that you're going somewhere that's a good fit for you, and that, again, you're celebrated, appreciated, and that you're going to actually thrive. Because in an environment like you mentioned, you're not going to thrive. But
This is it. And we say that, I mean, we say that not to say it's easy. And I think it is definitely something that I have as part of this kind of child prodigy and all these other privileges, that I am able to be like, hey, I'm able to detach myself from what's going on and say that sounds like a you problem. But I think it is something that if you're able to learn, to practice, to coach, to have the mentors, have the network around you, so you can see it's not you personally that is being treated like that, but this is bigger than you, this is above you, this is not something that's in your control, then that will do a lot to kind of maintain your sanity and mean that you can be happy and content in a tech career versus, you know, feeling not great, right? Which does happen to a lot of people, get caught up in the interactions and, you know, you get weighed down with feeling that it's personal, where really if you are able to focus on it is wider, is broader, and compare notes with other people, then you can see that actually it's not about anything that I've said or done, it's something wider, and then you can make an informed decision about the environments that you do want to be in.
Yes. And question for you, just in regards to, you mentioned going to other people and seeking advice too. Do you feel like in the corporate space you had a support team at work, or was your support team mostly external, like with friends, family, maybe other individuals that you knew who worked in tech but weren't at your job?
It was both. It was internal and it was external. And it's something I was always super conscious of, especially on the internships. Actually, it was something I definitely learned, that you have your internal crew, your internal network, your internal people who, you know, not all of them will be people in your team or your department. Like I said, you'd ask certain execs questions, and if they said something, you know, that sounded in a particular way, it'd be like, okay, cool. They could say no, but actually, what am I got to lose by going up and say, actually, I was the person that asked this question. Here's why I asked it. Actually, from what you said, that's something I've been thinking, or something I find interesting. Can we go for a coffee, or can we be connected, or is it okay if I run such and such by you, because here's why I asked the question. So I think I definitely did that internally, and some of those connections I still have today. And it's not people I talk to all the time, but, you know, you'll see each other on LinkedIn, or you bump into each other at events, or, you know, in the street, and it's like, oh my goodness, Simon, you know, how are you? Or Gary, how is all of that? So I definitely had internal, but I think you also need to have external, because again, there are things that you'll then realize, if everyone internally is saying one thing and no one externally is saying another thing, is saying the same thing, then you can be like, this is a very this company scenario, and do I need to be wrapped up in it? Or actually, am I going to go somewhere else and play by a different set of rules? And so it's important, I think it's really important to have both. I talk about this a lot in the book, actually, about finding the tech rooms you're going to engage with. But I think the other thing that's really important is it's those kind of weak ties, right? You kind of, you know, whether you run or you're a parent or whatever it is you do, there will be internal networks. And so it's about building them along different lines, not just around the fact that you're in this particular part of tech, right? So if you're a database admin, or if you're a QA tester, or whatever it is, yes, you can join that community, but also find the other things about you, because it's that areas of overlap, and it's those ready-made communities and ready-made networks that makes all of this 10 times easier, because then you dip into what's already there, rather than having to do that heavy lifting of, you know, slowly collating, you know, a network or board of directors. So I'm constantly, you know, doing it in different spaces, and you've got online networks, you've got offline networks. So tap into all of them. What's the one that's going to be the easiest for you to maintain, for you to contribute to, but also for you to receive from? And again, that's trial and error, like anything to do with human beings. You know, there'll be some spaces that look like they're ready-made and aren't, and don't work for you. And there'll be other places that might have been tangential that end up being where you get the most value from. I mean, I had this last week. There's a group of there's different entrepreneurship groups, and there was a WhatsApp group at the top of lockdown. Do you remember Don't Rush, that like Instagram trend?
Yes.
So there's a group that we have that's like Don't Rush, and it was like Black female founders, and it's still the WhatsApp group Don't Rush BFF. And on Thursday I was like, hey guys, something's happening, does anyone does anyone want to do this? And like someone came back from it, and it's like, who would have thought that that's, you know, I didn't join and do the TikTok so I could call on these people, you know, in a year and a half's time. So it's always the most random places that you see these things that actually you're like, yeah, that was a ready-made network that's also gone through the same rubbish. And I also have, you know, the scars, but also are now still thriving, and they've moved on, and here's how all of them did it. So that's super important, internal and external.
Yes. And I think a lot of times we think that we're the only ones until we go into that external community and we see this is happening in a lot of places, even though sometimes we don't want to talk about it. Exactly. So it's always great. And I love the advice that you gave in regards to community about giving as well as receiving, because I think we forget that sometimes. And so appreciate that advice and that tip. Also want to go back and touch on, so you're mentioning talking to executives, and we talk about it like it's so easy for people to just walk up there. I know people are introverted. I know people are extroverted as well, so it's easier for the extroverts. But for someone who wants to do something like that, they want to build those relationships, what tips or advice do you have, especially for people who are on the quieter side?
So I'd say start small and do it in a way that's comfortable for you. And it doesn't have to be that after the event you go up and you talk to the exec. It could be that you drop a LinkedIn message, or you tag them in a tweet, or if it's internal, you send a chat message or something along to them. So I think that would be my thing. And also start with gratitude, I think is always a really good thing to do. So you start with thanks for answering that question, or, thanks, actually, I read something once that you said, and that really helped me with this, that, the other. And if you're really specific, it also means that, it's not just you being like, oh my God, you're a great person, I only talk to you because you're an exec and the network you could give me. But it's like, here's specifically what you said that was really useful. Here's why it was useful. And I thank you for that. I want to be able to then, go into the next thing. But as an introvert, that you're really fortunate. People don't believe me. I'm an introvert too. We're really fortunate in that, you can do these things in the quiet. It doesn't have to be on a microphone or out loud or from a stage or, in the most high energy way. There are really kind of quiet, calm, careful ways for you to make connections and make links to people. But also be ready for no's. And I think the more you do it and the more practice you get, the easier you're like, hey, actually, yeah, that's fine. Like, makes sense, actually, from all that I know you do. I can understand why you might not have capacity for this. Cool. Is there anyone else you suggest that maybe I should be talking to or I'd be connected to? And I think people also, find that as an easy or a nice kind of a softer no. So practice makes progress on all of this stuff. Like practice. What's the way that works for you? Is it commenting on their things? Is it liking? Is it following? And sometimes you don't even need to have a conversation with that person to get the support that you need. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they put out enough that actually you can read and you can listen and you can watch, and you don't ever need to talk to Anne-Marie,
Yeah, exactly. And great advice. I appreciate that. And I want to segue, because you've mentioned it a couple of times, and it's about time to talk about your book.
Hey.
Oh, yes. So Anne-Marie, tell my listeners about the book. What is in the book? What is the topics that are covered? Give us all the details.
I'll give you all the juicy deets. So the book is a guide. It's a guide for anyone who's non-technical, who wants to, up there, who wants to take back control. I mean, that's it. I mean, I know it's a very politically charged statement to say, especially in our country, and I guess across that side of the pond, but, it's how women can take back tech. If we go back far enough, and not even that far, women have been in tech. It was seen as a very clerical thing, with the punch cards, with the telephone exchange, with even what the women in Hidden Figures were doing. A lot of it was seen as women's work. And with the power that came with that and the realization of the economic power, that was when it was then wrestled back by the men. And this is something that's way too important to leave to them. So the book is a guide for anyone who doesn't consider themselves technical, who's maybe afraid of the technology a little bit, who was told that, you're rubbish at maths or rubbish at math, and this is not something you can do. It's for everyone that has felt like this is not their domain. And it's a guidebook to getting back some of that technical control, building some of that digital literacy, getting some of that technical agency in a world that's so technical now. All these decisions are being made. It's where you've got the higher paid roles. Even if you're not in a technical role, technology is changing your role. And there's this whole thing of the robots are going to come and take all our jobs anyway. So this is a book about, how do we not necessarily stop that happening, but how do we make sure we're doing it in a way that makes sense? And doing it in a way that all of us have agency, so it doesn't happen to us, but it's happening maybe for us, but at least with us. And I think that my kind of analogy for this, for anyone that's seen Hidden Figures, is, there's that point in the film, they're all computers before the computers came in and did the job. And we see when she goes to the library, right? And there's a protest happening outside the library. She's gone to pick up this Fortran book. And she's like, reading Fortran, she's understanding this coding language. She gets to work. And she shows the ladies, she's like, ladies, this is the future. This is what we're going to do next. And then they see the computers being wheeled into the building. And it's not the end of their jobs. It's the beginning of a new chapter for their jobs. And that's what I'm hoping with this book. So half of it is a bit of the history and the herstory, really, the tech herstory, the rich tech herstory that we have. And then the second half is, what do you then do? Like, how do you get into these technical rooms? How do you explore what part of tech works for you? How do you even know what Bitcoin is, or why NFTs work, or, you know, whatever the next thing is? And I've got the perspectives of lots of different women, lots of different people, also peppered throughout the book. So you can see it's not just you have to be a child prodigy that's always loved taking things apart. You can come at it as a trained dancer. You can come at it as an archaeologist. You can come at it as someone who did study and did it at the right age, not the early age. You know, there's lots of different avenues and pathways in. So that's what the book is about. It's a practical and positive guide. That's what we have. So one of the quotes has said, and she's right. It's a positive and practical guide to using tech to better women's lives, for the women and for those around them.
So we needed this guide about probably 10, 15 years ago when I was in college, now that I've aged myself. But I am so excited to read this. I'm so excited to have a guide, because as many people as I talk to, everyone has always mentioned, why don't we have a guide for this? Or, you know, just one place where we can find this information. And now you've gone and created it. And I want to ask, what was your motivation? What inspired you to create it?
A couple of different things. I think the biggest one is, and we haven't spoken about it at all, actually, I run this nonprofit Stemettes.
Yes.
And we work with the girls, we work with young non-binary people from 5 up to 25. I also then get to go out in the world. I'm on TV, I'm in magazines, I'm on stages, I'm at companies. I get to talk to a lot of people and a lot of women. And everyone's like, oh, I wish I was younger. I wish I could come to Stemettes events. I wish. Mm-hmm. And everyone says this. And I'm like, you know, I only set up Stemettes because when I was starting, all of the spaces had, like, they were late night, there was alcohol there, it was for adults only, and there was no spaces for the girls to come and explore outside of what was happening at school. Mm-hmm. So for me, this is my kind of, look, you're too old for Stemettes, but never fear, She's in Control is here. Read this, follow along, go to those events. You're an adult, you know, there are things that you can do that young people I work with cannot do, cannot access. Mm-hmm. And so this is my love letter. Like I said, this is my, like, you know, we're going to get on it. This is my guide for those women and people who think it's too late. And it never is. I mean, I say this all the time, you know, until you're dead, it's never too late to understand these things, because you're living in this world. Like, it's an agency that you get the same way as, you know, learning English means that you can order your own food, right? Make your own choices, get around, and you can read the signs in the city that you're in, as long as English is the language, right? It's the same thing of, you know, getting this technical literacy means that, you know, you're not sending your DNA off to a company who you don't know what they're going to do it with, because you've been able to ask the right questions as you get started, right? It means that when a new system comes in at work, you're able to understand how the system works, how it fits with what you're doing, so that even if it does remove your job, you know what the next job is going to be, or the alternative job is going to be. And this isn't just for people in the tech industry. This is for anyone that's alive now in this technical world. So that's the aim, that's the hope, that's the intention, that's the motivation. And I'd love for us to get to a point where, you know, society does operate that way, that, you know, in the same way that everyone has an opinion on immigration, even if they're not an immigration lawyer, it would be great for people to have you know, informed, slightly more informed decisions on technology, so when these changes are coming in, you can be like, no, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound like that's a problem that technology could solve, without it making things worse than they already are. And so actually, this isn't something we're going to support, which we don't have enough lawmakers that understand. We don't have enough leaders that understand. We don't have enough teachers, parents, or people across society that understand this. And it's really, really important. So that's my motivation. I don't want us to have the Black Mirror dystopian scenario. Like, it's not too late, right, to turn things around a little bit.
Yes. And I think that it's great to have individuals who I feel like tech is such a scary world for a lot of people. So I love that you put this book out and that you have resources that people can utilize in order to learn more about tech. And I hope that a lot of people pick up your book and they read it and they understand why it's important just to know. And that goes back to the curiosity piece. Exactly. Like you said, when you were younger, you were curious how things worked. So what did you do? You took things apart, you put them back together.
Tried. My dad didn't kill me. He should have killed me, really, for doing that. But anyway.
No, but at least you were trying something and you were curious about it. I think we've lost a little bit of our curiosity along the way of like actually understanding how things operate and why things work. And that makes such a difference, especially in tech, as tech is evolving every second. What was good yesterday might not even work today. So we need to stay curious because it's in the future. It's not going anywhere.
Exactly. And it's constantly changing. I think it's a good point you make there. Like, it's not done, right? The rest is still unwritten. And that's kind of one of the subheadings I definitely have. And so it's actually not too late for you to bring whatever your perspective is, whatever your experiences are, to refine it, because it's not locked in. Like, this is the thing, like you say, there's a new version of Facebook out every 2 weeks. And most of tech is like that. It's incredibly iterative. So if you didn't get in the last 2 weeks, you can get in the next 2 weeks, right? And, you know, make that edit and make that update. And it's still open. A lot of it is still open for you to have influence over.
Yes. And now I do want to touch on for the Black men in tech as well. Is this a book that would be helpful for them? Should they check it out too?
I mean, of course, why not? Why would my publisher want me to limit the audience? I mean, sure, they can definitely listen. I think it's an interesting one though, where, you know, and I have this with Stemettes a lot of that history that we tell, a lot of the stories that I've heard, whether it's Gladys West, who I'm sure you've already had, like, you know, spoken about on the podcast, or, you know, or even, you know, the ladies in Hidden Figures. I think it's enriching for everybody to see that. Like, the problem is the social norm. We don't exist. Me and you don't exist. If you ask most people in the street, you know, to name a technologist or whatever, if you showed them the picture of me or of you and be like, you know, what does this woman do? No one says technology. I was on a big show in the UK here called Countdown, which is like a British institution. It's been going for, I think, something like more than like 30 years or whatever, longest running game show on the planet on TV. And they have a maths section, and I was the arithmetician, and the backlash that was out there, because people had never seen a Black woman doing maths, was understandable and expected, because, you know, I wasn't born yesterday, but also it was crazy that, you know, you've never seen a Black woman do maths. You've seen a woman do maths because it's always been a woman doing arithmetician on that show, but you've never seen a Black woman in that space. And the number of people that, oh my good, you know, they were up in arms. And so I think it is important for Black men, for men of any kind, to be able to see this and be like, actually, when I'm interviewing someone, or when we're making decisions about positions of responsibility, when we're making jokes in our space, when we're making assumptions about our users, when we're, you know, setting our technical priorities in the ways that we're making our technical decisions, they need to have that we exist, right? And that we have some sort of agency, and that we know what we're talking about on particular things, and have examples to point to say it's not just your sister, but historically there were people, and in the next generation there were people. I think it's really important for everyone to get this message and to understand it, because we all have a role to play. It isn't necessarily just about the women having a guide, but it's about the system changing. It's about the assumptions we have about who is technical and what people have to contribute to those technical decisions, not being purely based on computer science grades, but actually on the fact that, you know, if you've you know, I say this all the time, if you've had a period before and someone's building period tech, you'd want to hope that that's something you can bring to that conversation. But even if you're not building period tech, you'd want to think that there's lots of things and lots of experiences that you might have had, and things that you know how to do, and things that you know how to track, that might be useful in other scenarios.
Right.
And when we have people building period tech without anyone that's ever had a period as part of that, then we have to think, what are the other less overt and less obvious insights that we're missing out on in all kinds of technology? And so that would be my message to Black men. That would be my message to men as well, that actually, you know, the same way that as a Black man, some parts of your experience and your perspective are missing in a lot of the rooms you step into, think also about the Black women, think also about, you know, the men with disabilities, think also about lots of different types of people who aren't being reflected, that you have particular agency, you have a particular privilege, and how are you using that to then open up and ensure that we're building better tech? Because at the end of the day, that's what this is about, like building tech that improves things, not tech that just maintains the status quo, or what we actually see, which is tech that solves one problem and creates 10 in its place. And that's super important.
Yes, exactly.
That's what I want to be proud of as a technologist. That's what our legacy, I want our legacy to be, that we solved the problems. We didn't just create a whole load.
Yes. And I want to go back and touch on, because you mentioned being on Countdown and the backlash. And then also just thinking about, if, let's just say they took our pictures on the street, they would never say that we work in tech. do you feel like the representation within tech is not getting better?
Oh, that's a good question. I feel like it's getting better, but it's glacially getting better. It's not fast enough. I feel like it is getting better, and I think there's lots of progress that is being made, but it's not fast enough because it's not getting better at the rate of technical progression. Right. So if you think about how quickly tech changes and how quickly things are adopted and are rolled out and the scale at which they're rolled out, we haven't had the same kind of adaptation and scale of rollout of the right kind of representation in tech. And we see this again and again and again and again and again. And there's all kinds of people that point out how, there are all kinds of ridiculous decisions that are being made or new technological problems that are being solved that actually, are rooted in phrenology or rooted in racism or rooted in, things that actually, if you had the right people in those rooms working on those cutting edge things or in leadership positions, higher up above where that cutting edge tech is supposedly being done, then the innovation would be, truly groundbreaking. Whereas at the moment, it's kind of just more of the same and more of making things worse for particular people. And so it's not fast enough. But we're getting there. I'm still optimistic. I work with the next generation as well, and I can see already that their definition of success is different from even my generation. And I wouldn't say I'm old. I've called myself young throughout this whole interview. But I can see that the youth's definition of success is differing quite wildly from even my definition of success. And so I think the time is coming, but we don't have to wait. Like, everything shouldn't be on them. Why can't we give them something that's worthy of inheritance rather than, as you guys would say, a dumpster fire of poor decisions, which at the moment is kind of what it looks like a little bit.
Yeah, quite a bit. And that makes me think, I always tell people, for like products that we're using or new technology that we're coming up with, I always want someone, if you're trying to sell me a product or, whatever, I want someone who looks like me actually on the team because they understand what I'm going for. If it's just a bunch of people who don't look like me, what are we doing? You're not going to create something that's for me. And so I think that kind of relates to the point that you're making as well. But I am curious around how the youth are defining success. What are you seeing versus how we define success, especially in the tech space?
I think it's very heartening. I think even to the point that you were just making about the representation. I mean, it's having people like you in the team, but it's also having people like you considered as part of what is being built and what's being created, which I think with the next generation, I think there is definitely a lot more of kind of that challenging of those norms and opening up of those perspectives. But their definition of success, I think, where in the olden days, and I say that, when I started, it was, how much money can you make and what's the status that you will get to and the title. I think with the newer generation, there's this whole thing of soft life. I mean, there's that we're grappling with, but there's also this side of, I also want to know, how long am I working? I want to know what your values are and what you're doing around the environment and what you're doing around people. And actually, if you don't have those people in your team, where are they in your network, or where are they in your supply chain, or where are they in your, your feedback loops? Where are they in your consideration? Where are you having an intersectional approach? Where are you having something that, considers those who are from historically marginalized and excluded communities? They're asking these questions up front, and they're very much like, look, like, you either got it or you don't. And if you don't, I'm just going to build my own. And I've seen that so many times where, we run mentoring programs, we, have panel events, we have hackathons, we have all kinds of opportunities for them to come and connect with industry. And, some of our young people will start a job and maybe not necessarily with a partner, and they'll call me up and they'll be like, Hammery, so I quit because they did this, that, the other, but actually that's not why I'm calling you. I've started this new business up and we've got the funding X, Y, and Z. And here's the little nuance, the little thing that I'm trying to figure out. And I remember you were doing that at Stemettes. So how do you think I should do it here? And I'm like, wait a minute, you quit? Why don't we rewind? They're like, yeah, they weren't listening. And they said this about women. And actually I was like, no, this isn't the right place. I'm just going to build it myself. And that's genuinely, what they're doing.
Yeah.
But the other thing we're seeing is, I still have to justify. I mean, I don't, but there's certain people who still don't understand why I run Stemettes and why I do what I do. They're like, oh, if you're so technical, so great, you know, you should be prime minister, you should be running this, you should be top entrepreneur at that, you should be blah, 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 blah. And I'm always like, why is that the only thing that someone who's smart can do? Like, there are lots of other things you could be doing. Like, why is it not valuable for me to be working with the next generation, or me to be bringing more people in? And with the next generation, they're all thinking on the way up, how do I bring other people with me?
Interesting.
How do I share my passion for where chemistry meets biology? Where do I share my passion for Python? Who am I going to make sure that they can also appreciate these maths jokes that I'm making? And that's something that all of them are having. They're like, yeah, to me, that's part of what successful means. It's, yes, having the role and having gainful employment, but it's also having brought people along. It's also having shared my skills. It's also having, you know, tech for good, and all of these other things for them are part of success. Where if they make the money and nothing else, that's not really, you know, that's not really what they're aiming for. That's not really what they're going for. For them, that's not what success looks like. Just making a whole load of money and selling a whole load of people a whole load of cake is not really what they're after. It's okay, cool. Who have I taught to make the cake? Who have I brought along? What problems have I solved with the cake that I'm baking? And so for them, there's a complete shift. And I think there might be something about, you know, climate change and all those other things they've grown up with, where they're much more aware of the problems. And so why have money on a planet that's on fire? But I think there's a lot more that they've been able to kind of engage with, and a lot more values that they're able to say, this tech scene needs to match up with the values that I have. And if it doesn't, I'm going to use the tech in the way that works for my values. And I'm actually going to opt out. And they do have the agency to do that. It's the nature of the tools. It's the nature of the way that the web is working, where they can decide to opt out of particular things. And that's what I'm seeing them doing. So it's really heartening. I think it's a warning I give quite a lot to tech companies. That if you don't sort this out, the next generation, A, aren't going to work here, and B, they're going to create the thing that does. And they're going to, you know, they're going to Kodak you out. So there's that. But yeah, I mean, their definition of success is so wildly different. The things that they're working on, the things that they want to do. And this isn't just as young people, this is as young adults, this is as people entering the industry who are asking for more and opting out of where it's not, that level's not being met.
Good. We need to ask for more. It's about time. I think it is empowering to hear and see that that this generation is more focused on the community versus, I feel like in the last couple of years, I've seen a lot of growth in the individualistic kind of thinking. So to hear that the youth are thinking from a group community mentality is so heartwarming, because it's a different, like you said, completely different approach than what we've been seeing. And this is how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be a community and help each other, not be these individualistic thought processes of like, how can this help us? But like you said, destroy the planet or destroy a particular group of people. So I really appreciate seeing that and hearing that.
That's why I love it. It's the best. It's my favorite part of everything I do. I wear so many different hats. I didn't even mention at the beginning, I'm the incoming president of the British Science Association. And I think for me, this is the most exciting part, is always, you know, seeing what's coming next and being able to give those people the platforms so that we can bring this change about quicker. Yeah. With the right, because I think that's the other thing that, you know, I'm sure you've touched on across the podcast, but having those right formative experiences, those things that you do. I know not everyone is young, and, you know, there are things like that, but, you know, you really do get your own shaping of the world, like your own grip on the world in those first couple of years. And so having those opportunities and say, okay, cool, what you're doing is of value, and here's the platform we can give you to make that happen, means that further down the line, they're less likely to, you know, come up against some of the issues that have kept women out of this space for so long, because they've had that formative experience and no one can tell them, no one can make them feel like it's a them problem. Right. They're like, I've been doing this since. So, you know, I don't know what kind of tech company you guys are running, but when I was young, this is what we were doing. And so actually, I know that it's possible for that to be a thing. I know that even though that's your norm, that's not the norm, or we don't have to live in the norm. And so that's the best bit of my job, best bit of what I'm doing constantly, is engaging with those younger entrepreneurs, with those younger technologists, with the future, even non-technologists, seeing how they're applying technology and using the tools. And it's just incredible to be able to get them, you know, in front of these institutions, in front of these leaders, so they can understand, you know, you've got to be a lot more long term in your approach to all the things that you're doing at the moment.
Yes. And Anne-Marie, we've talked a lot about the different hats that you've worn. And to wrap up today's conversation, have a couple questions just to elaborate on some of the things that we've mentioned. Let's start with Stemettes. So we keep mentioning it, but I want you to just go into more detail. What is the organization? And then also, how can people participate or possibly volunteer with Stemettes?
Sure. So Stemettes is a nonprofit that engages, informs, and connects the next generation of women and non-binary people to STEM and STEAM. So the science, technology, engineering, maths, science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths, by showing them a broad diversity of role models. So folks can join in as volunteers. We have the Stemettes Showcase that we do 3 times a year. So one on Ada Lovelace Day, one on International Day of Women and Girls in Science, and then the other one on International Women in Engineering Day. So if you visit our website or search for Stemettes Showcase, there'll be one that you can watch the previous one, or you can sign up and join us for the next one. And there we explain it all, how to be a volunteer, how to donate, what to give, you know, how to spread the word, follow us on all the socials, you know, all of those are really, really useful things to be able to do. But it is mentoring, it is panel sessions, it is speed networking, it is just engaging with the next generation as many different times as possible, so they can see all the different forms of success and all the different forms of role modeling. It just doesn't just have to be, you know, you can be Anne-Marie and then that's it. It's like you can be Deena, right? And also before pre-Deena, you can also be pre-Deena and also end up right in this space. So that's what Stemettes is all about. It's free, it's fun, and as much as possible we have food at what we're doing, because, you know, free food pulls the masses. You know, you got to meet that part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's online, it's all free, and yeah, the website is the best place, the social media as well, all of it is the best place to head in and find where you might fit in with that whole piece of work.
And what is the website, and where can they find you on social media?
So stemettes.org, which is STEM as in STEM, and then ETS as in suffragettes, but plural, so maybe we could do it that way. Or if you search for me, Anne-Marie Imafidon, I'm sure there'll be bits in the show notes as well. There's lots of links back to buying the book, but also, you know, getting involved with any of the number of projects that I'm in with.
Yes, and speaking about the book, because there's that author hat that you have, or people who are looking to buy the book, is that available worldwide? Where can we get the book?
I believe so. Yeah, if you search for She's in Control, head to she'sincontrol.com. And we've got the pre-order links. It's out on the 8th of September. So you should be able to, it's on Amazon, on Waterstones, Smiths, all those kinds of places. So it's on all good outlets as well. And you can have a purchase and buy a copy for yourself and buy one for a friend who has been teetering, you know, because we all know those people who are kind of, you know, you see the potential in them, they don't see it. Yeah. And so yeah, this could be a gift you get them for maybe Christmas or something.
Yes. And in your book, you're giving people advice just about being in tech. So I actually want to end our conversation with, what is the greatest piece of advice someone gave you while working in tech?
Seek forgiveness, not permission. And this actually came from Grace Hopper. And I think it's one of those ones where I think we have that idea of asking for permission or being like, is this okay? I think a lot of the time, if you're trying something new, as long as it's not illegal or hurting someone, then actually trying it that first time and seeking forgiveness when it doesn't go right. Like if you've been conscientious enough to want to ask permission, you're probably not going to set something on fire. And so actually getting going with something, you can always surprise yourself at how real it becomes, how the scope of where it goes. I'm sure you have this with the podcast, right? You got going, and actually because it was a real thing that people could actually tune into, or they could record or whatever, you're like, oh my goodness, you know, it's being listened to in this country, or that person's using it on that course, or all those kinds of things. But it's, if you'd have asked permission, if you'd have been like, is it okay if we, you know, make it available to those people? Is it okay actually if we say it's Black only? Is it okay? You know, if you start asking that, is it okay, you get in the way. And actually it's better for you to say, hey, I did it, here's why I did it, here's why I thought it was going to work. And actually, if it's blown up in a particular way, I hold my hands up, I seek forgiveness, and, you know, you go from that. And more times than not, you don't even need the permission, and you won't need to ask for the forgiveness. And when people tell you no, normally it's because it's, you know, not within their realm of possibility, not because it's not in the wider realm of possibility. And so, yeah, like it's removing that one barrier. And there's lots of things that I've done where it's like, hey, you know, I could ask, but actually I'm going to get it done, and let's see. Let's ride this roller coaster. Let's see where this goes. And it's paid off. Here I am talking to you, so it's definitely paid off.
And then what is the best piece of advice that you have for any of the listeners listening today?
Find your tribe. And we touched on it earlier. I think having that network of people, and it's having those networks, even I should say, plural of people that you can learn with, that you can commiserate with, that you can celebrate with. It makes all of this so much easier. And you even said it yourself earlier, you know, sometimes you feel like you're the only.
Yes.
And you're not. You're really not. You're really not. I mean, this is why I talk about the history so much. You're not the only, you know, in the history of womankind. You won't be the only now, and you might be the only in this room right now, but there are other people that were in this room. There's other people that will be in this room. There are other people that are in similar rooms at exactly the same time, going through exactly the same things. And there's a sense of relief. There's a lightness. There's a power in numbers that comes from being connected to be like, oh my goodness, he also didn't believe you on databases. Okay, so, you know, so that awful, you know, evening I had, that time I felt this way, if I knew, I wouldn't have carried that. And that's something that's really powerful. The deeper you go into tech, the more you go into this industry, and let's be honest, any industry, the more you come up against those things, and being able to compare notes and have that tribe to learn along with, have that tribe to experiment with, the better it is for you. So that's definitely my advice I'd like to pass on to folks. And like we said, the podcast is the tribe. We're all part of your tribe as you're listening along, right? And you're comparing notes with your database that you also have a solution for that Felix didn't want to hear from you on. So there we have it.
Exactly. And Anne-Marie, anything that we haven't mentioned today that you want to share with the audience? I'm giving you the open floor for any final words.
Oh my goodness. Final words. Have fun with it. I think that's the only other thing that we don't talk about. We talk a lot about tech being like harder, faster, bigger, stronger. And really it's about solving problems. So have fun solving problems. I think we forget that too much. And yeah, it's nice to have more money and it's nice to do things quicker, but it's also it's really satisfying to create a solution and solve a problem and see that exist outside of yourself. So yeah, have fun with it. Have fun with the exploration.
I can make my world come true. All my dreams will see me through. And if that will get me down, my dreams will turn things all around. With a smile upon my face, I can see a better place. Doesn't matter what blow. I can